If you're thinking about selling a home in Texas, know this. The Texas Realtor listing agreement that's typically used in our market has changed. And the change is around a typical question I'm asked almost at every listing appointment. What percentage do you charge for your service? Now, that may be or be the biggest concern for a seller. And as a real estate agent, I get it. It's where a lot of sellers are focusing, but they're focusing on the wrong question. Because if your entire decision comes down to what percentage do you charge, you could be saving money on the fee you're paying your real estate broker and still walk away from the closing table with less money in your pocket. Like, wait, what? Come again? How does that work? So in this video, I'm going to explain the changes to the Texas listing agreement, how compensation works now in the new system, and why the number you should be really focused on is not the commission percentage exclusively. It is what you ultimately net. So let's start with what actually is changing. Beginning with the updated Texas Realtor listing agreement. Broker-to-broker compensation is being removed from that agreement. So previously, sellers often saw compensation discussed as a part of the listing agreement in a way that included the listing side, meaning what the listing broker was going to be paid in the commission, and the potential compensation to the other broker, i.e. the buyer's agent. And that changed July 1st, and this is 2026. The listing agreement is being simplified so that compensation and the compensation agreement between the seller and the listing broker is clearly addressed. And it's the only amount that's being addressed. If there's compensation involving a buyer's broker, that is handled separately in the sales contract, which has also changed. And I think this is an opportunity for a much better conversation with sellers and buyers. Because for years, the real estate industry has trained the consumer to ask one question: what's the commission? And when sellers compare agents based on that one factor, that percentage point, but commission is just a line item in a much larger equation. And for sellers, the real question should be, what strategy gives me the best financial outcome? And those are not the same questions that I'm getting from sellers. And listen, sellers, I get it. I completely understand why the focus is on commission. It's visible. It is easy to understand. And if one agent says 1% and another agent says 2%, the lower number feels completely obvious, right? You know, on a $500,000 home, 1 percentage point means $5,000. That's simple math. So the natural reaction is, if I choose a lower fee, I save $5,000. Makes perfect sense. And you might, but that calculation assumes that everything else about the transaction will be the same between those two agents. The same sales price, the same time on the market, the same concessions, the same inspection negotiations, the same buyer quality, the same appraisal outcome, and the same probability of closing. And real estate transactions do not work that way. You are not comparing two identical products sitting side by side on a shelf. You are comparing strategy, and the strategy can affect almost every number in the transaction. And sellers, here's the thing. This is the number I think you should be caring about. What gets deposited into your bank account after the sale? That is your outcome, not the list price, not the commission percentage, not even necessarily the list price. It's your net. And to understand that number, you have to look at the entire transaction. Your price does matter. Your mortgage payoff matters. Your secondary liens matter. Those solar panels, closing expenses matter. Any seller concessions matter. Repairs and credits negotiated after the inspection matter. The amount of time you continue carrying the property matters. And yes, broker compensation matters. Every one of those numbers affect what you ultimately walk away with. So when someone says you can save 1%, my next question would be, compared to what? Because saving $5,000 in one line item does not help you if you lose 10,000 somewhere else. So let's use a simple example. We'll say you have a home that should realistically sell for somewhere around 500,000. You interview two agents. Agent A charges a lower fee. Agent B charges 1% more. If everything else is equal, Agent A should save you $5,000. That's real money. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. But now let's look at the entire transaction. All right. So Agent A recommends listing high because that's the number you wanted to hear. The home comes in on the market at 525. The first 2 weeks go by. You get some showings, no offers. And then the showings start to dribble down and slow down to nothing. After 3 weeks, you reduce the sales price. Now the buyers are asking, what's wrong with it? So eventually you receive an offer at 490. The buyer asks for closing cost assistance. After the inspection, they ask for additional repairs or credit because the home has now been on the market longer. You, as a seller, don't feel like you have maybe as much leverage. So maybe you close at 490. You give, say, $7,500 in concessions. You maybe give another $3,000 for repairs, and you even made 2 additional mortgage payments, paid utilities, lawn care, and the other carry expenses while the home sat on the market. So ask yourself, did you save money on the commission? Yes. Did you make more money? That's a completely different question. And that's something that you need to take a look at. So now let's look at the same property with a different strategy. The home is positioned correctly from the beginning. The price is based on what buyers are doing in that specific market, not what we hope they will do. Not with the ability to negotiate. That's the one I like to hear. The preparation is done before the home ever hits the market. The photography, the video, online presentation, all the marketing, all launched together. The agent has a strategy for the first 7 to 14 days, because that's often when you have the greatest opportunity to capture the attention of the newest, most active buyers. The home receives a strong offer, and maybe it sells for 505. Maybe the seller agrees on a smaller concession. Maybe the inspection negotiation is handled differently because the seller has more leverage, just came on the market. Maybe the home closes a month sooner. Now, compare those two. In the first scenario, you saved $5,000 on one line item, but you sold for $15,000 less. You gave more concessions, and potentially you gave more after inspection, and you carried the house for longer in the second. So in the second scenario, you paid more on one line item, but to the amount that got deposited into your account, it was higher than the first. That is why commission percentages alone is incomplete math. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This is not an argument that the agent who charges the most automatically is the best agent. That would be just as flawed as saying the agent who charges the least is automatically the best value. A higher fee does not guarantee a higher sales price. Fancy marketing does not guarantee a better result. And no, agent out there can promise exactly what a buyer will pay. What I'm saying is that you should evaluate the fee in context. If an agent charges more, ask, what am I getting for that? What is the pricing strategy? How did you determine the price? What happens before we go on the market? What is the marketing plan? How are you going to create exposure for this listing? How are you going to communicate with me? How often are you going to communicate with me? How do you evaluate an offer beyond the sales price? How do you negotiate concessions? How do you handle inspections? How do you handle the negotiations of those inspections? What happens if a home doesn't sell in the first few weeks? Those questions should tell you much more than any percentage point that is charged. So the updated system also means that sellers need to understand that the listing broker's compensation and the buyer's request involving buyer-broker compensation are separate conversations. A seller may receive an offer where the buyer asks the seller to contribute to the buyer's brokerage costs. It's in paragraph 12. That doesn't mean you automatically say yes. And it does not mean it's an automatic no. You have to evaluate the entire offer. Suppose one buyer offers $500,000 and asks for $10,000 towards closing costs. Another buyer offers $485,000 and asks for nothing. Which one's better? You can't just go off one line. You have to calculate the net. So you have to look at financing, the appraisal risk, the option period, the closing timeline, contingencies, those are real, and the buyer's ability to perform, and the probability of the transaction actually making it to closing. This is why I think the new system can create a better conversation. Instead of assuming how compensation works, sellers should understand each component and make a decision based on the entire offer versus one line item. So what you should ask, I'm expecting these questions. So before you sign a listing agreement with any agent, I would ask for more than the commission quote. Ask the agent to walk you through the actual agreement. Ask what happens about the compensation you're agreeing to and paying the listing broker, what the services are included, how will potential buyer requests for brokerage costs or other concessions be evaluated. Ask for an estimated net sheet up front. And then ask for one of my favorite questions. What are the 3 biggest things that you could cause me to net less than I expect? That answer will tell you how the agent thinks. It'll be a good one to ask, because selling home isn't not just putting it in the MLS and waiting for a buyer. The financial outcome can be affected by pricing, preparation, timing, marketing, offer analysis, financing, appraisal, inspections, concessions, and negotiation. Your agent should be able to explain those pieces, how they work together. And so, yes, the Texas listing agreement is changing. Actually, it has changed. It's in the past. It's July 1st, and this is July 16th. And compensation is becoming more clearly separated and transparent, which I love. But if you are a seller, I would not let the entire conversation become, so what do you charge again? And make a decision just solely based on that. That is a cost question. The bigger question is, how much money am I going to net from the sale of this property? Because the cheapest strategy is not always the strategy that costs the least. The highest offer is not always the offer that nets the most. The goal is to understand the entire transaction before you make the decision. So, if you're thinking about selling a home in Cedar Park or Leander or Round Rock or Georgetown or anywhere in the greater Austin area, I am happy to walk you through the updated listing agreement and the current market and what a realistic seller net could look like for your home. No pressure, I do these all the time. So, just the numbers, the strategy, and the information you need to make the right decision for you is here. And if this video helped you understand the changes, subscribe to the channel, and I'll continue breaking down what Texas buyers and sellers are actually need to know, not just the headlines. Until next time.